Phantasm is a delusion of a disordered mind. Something appearing where it shouldn't be.
Wow, how'd you do that?
A ghost, a specter, a phantom.
Phantasm has become a cult classic, and it will be forever.
I don't care how many times you see Phantasm, you still get scared.
Phantasm was way ahead of its time. I think Phantasm combines so many different elements that people hadn't seen before.
It's a horror movie, except then all of a sudden, somewhere in the end of the second act, it turns into this science fiction movie. That's very different.
Phantasm.
And to know that our efforts are still being rewarded means a lot.
Phantasmic, yes.
It comes from, the mystery that we created of the first Phantasm that has held people's attention all these years.
My first day in my dorm at UCLA, I came in and Don was sitting there and we introduced each other, and he asked me what I wanted to be, and I said an attorney, and I asked him what he wanted to be, and he said, I'm going to be a movie director.
The first film I did was called Jim the World's Greatest. I co-wrote it with a partner, his name was Craig Mitchell, and we co-directed the film, actually.
And I ended up just working on that as an assistant director and production manager.
It was a story about a football player in high school, and there was this alcoholic father.
I played the father who menaces his little boy. To sort of get him in the mood, I would kid around and make faces at him, which is just this. And I think Don saw that, and that might also have inspired him to let me do the tall man.
The next film up was called Kenny & Company, and this was done much the same way as Jim the World's Greatest, which was, on a very, very minuscule budget, and it all takes place in the context of the 4 or 5 days that lead up to Halloween.
Trick or treat!
And there's one scene where a hand comes down on his shoulder from the monster, and he just jumps, and the whole audience jump. And when Don saw how much fun it was to be sitting in the back of the audience and seeing everyone scream, I think that was the actual genesis of him wanting to do a scary movie, to where he could have that effect all the time. And that was very, very difficult, trying to find, kids who had the poise and the acting ability to star in the movie.
That was the film. I was introduced to, in my opinion, one of the great child actors of all time, Michael Baldwin.
Howdy, partner.
Along with an actor who was not only in my first film, but also almost every other film I made, which is the great Reggie Bannister.
Be especially careful of candy apples and popcorn balls, because people have been known to put razor blades and rat poison in them.
These early films were a proving ground where I did my R&D and learned a little bit about film technique and the business, and also where I started to assemble my repertory of stock players who would be at my disposal for Phantasm.
What is a phantasm?
It's a figment of the imagination, a fantasy. It's a person's body being somewhere that it's not supposed to be. So all kinds of weird things. It was Edgar Allan Poe loved the word. He used it all the time in his works, and that's where we stole it from.
I've always been fascinated with the American way of death and the way that bodies are taken by the mortician. Strange procedures are conducted on the corpse. The corpse comes back looking different, and there's a grand ceremony with pageantry. It's very eerie and strange, and it just seemed to me like that this would be a really fascinating subtext for a horror film.
You think you'll go to heaven? You go to us.
The original idea came from a dream.
I had had a dream somewhere in my late teens about being pursued through a corridor by some kind of a flying steel ball. I went up to a cabin in the mountains outside Los Angeles, and I spent a couple weeks up there.
That was a really great environment because it was just this kind of lone cabin out in the middle of nowhere that would get pretty creepy at nighttime while Don was writing.
Little occurrences around the cabin would make me think up ideas. I was drinking a cup of Coke in a little styrofoam cup, and I finished drinking it and I punched my finger up through the bottom of the cup. It got me thinking about severed fingers. It was an interesting time being isolated like that. I've never done it since. I should probably try it again.
At that point, he was only 22 years old, and it's his third feature film he's making at that point. And he had a lot of confidence.
In addition to directing and writing, then I was also the cinematographer and the editor. That was really out of necessity.
Right from the very beginning, Don's family was always involved in the movies. Don's father also would be one of the investors on all the movies. Even though he had raised money for the second, third movie, he still invested himself in those movies.
It was a low-budget movie, maybe $400,000, somewhere in there, yes.
So, he was definitely supportive because he wanted to make sure we made the best movie possible so he could get his money back.
Of course, my wife, Kate Coscarelli, then known as Shirley Coscarelli, she's written 6 major novels, New York Times best-selling author. Worked with Don, or helped him whenever she was called upon. And she learned to become a crew member.
Don's mom, became a surrogate mom to me.
And she would do the costuming, she'd do the makeup.
Kate took me down to a little tailor named Benny the tailor in Long Beach. She had, with or without permission, I don't know, taken one of her husband's black suits, one of his best black suits, and had the tailor strip it down with very narrow sleeves and very, very narrow pant legs. And of course, then the blood red little tie pin. And I incidentally had to lose 30 pounds to play that role.
Angus Scrimm was actually known as Rory Guy, and he had been in Jim the World's Greatest, the first movie, and we had him to one of the screenings of Kenny and Company, and afterwards I walked up and said, we have a part for you, you're going to play an alien in the new movie. And he said, oh, that's terrific, which country am I from? I said, no, from out of this world. And he thought this was quite a leap for him, and so he ended up coming up with Angus Scrimm as his nom de plume for Phantasm.
How tall am I is a question I'm often asked.
Actually not that tall.
Don is about the same, maybe he's taller than a tall man,
I was a fat, squat little boy, but at puberty, I suddenly shot up to 6'4". However, I've never been taller than that. And as you are aware, or will become aware as you age, the skeletal structure shrinks as one grows older. So I have now shrunk down to about 6.5 feet. Don Coscarelli towers over me. He must be 6'5" at least.
So it's just a function of these really cool leather boots that our costume designer, my mother, found.
I was given these huge boots that had lifts inside them.
We had them actually built up at a shoemaker to give him an extra about 3 inches. So in heels, in his costume, he's about 6'7".
And then the camera often, if you'll note, especially in the first film, was placed just a little lower than I so that you're looking up at the tall man.
The funeral is about to begin, sir.
I think we cheated and have him on a box in that scene.
And Angus, of course, would stay and roll. When he was in his makeup and in his platform shoes that gave him the extra height and his skinny tie, he would just kind of stand off to the side, and nobody really went near him. They were kind of taken aback, all the crew people.
I've been waiting for you.
The first scene that I recall shooting was the tall man burst through the window at him. We broke through about 3 or 4 panes of fake glass before we finally got that scene right.
And he did all his stunts. There was no stuntman for the tall man. He jumped into that pit. He was a real trooper.
Yeah, Kathy Lester, we were really lucky to find her. I mean, she was just perfect for that role.
That's when I wore my jersey lavender dress to the screen test. thought, let him see the curves. We did the test, and I heard from Don shortly after, and he said, you know, you had this devious, sensual quality about you, and we like that. And he goes, you know what? You're going to be the lady in lavender. So that's really how the whole dress thing came to be.
That's spooky, isn't it?
No, it's exciting.
I had no idea of the tall man's alter ego, the lady in lavender. I don't think she was not in the original script.
I don't think it was until later on that he explained to me that I was going to be the female counterpart of the tall man.
It's a very interesting cutting at the end of the movie,
where you see me looking down at Reggie, and all of a sudden then you see Angus' face. I don't think it was very clear as to what was going on there.
and then all of a sudden she turns into the tall man right now. I mean, come on, the implications there are pretty interesting, I think.
No, that's the what the cutting style is supposed to imply, which later one would have probably accomplished with a morph.
I didn't know I had an alter ego, but I couldn't have a prettier one. But not until I saw the film did I see the trick that Don had played on me, which he never bothered to broach or explain at any point in the making of the film.
When you're in the vicinity of the tall man, reality can distort, time can distort, and you know, things just aren't what they seem. It was just an attempt to keep the audience off balance and to keep the tall man scary.
So, what's the only thing to do in this town? I originally was supposed to be doing this scene in my bra, and I thought, well, no big deal. But what happened was, I had my makeup done, they called me to come out and do the scene, and when I opened the door, I hear all these guys saying, hey, bring her out, you know, and I was like, no. I'm not gonna do this unless it's a completely closed set.
Kathy didn't want to have, you know, the topless part, which I can understand.
And Don said, well, do you mind if we get a body double then?
Wow.
Needless to say, when I went to the screening with my mother, and I saw a pair of breasts 20 feet high by 20 feet wide that were supposed to be mine, I screamed. And then my mother turns to me and she said, you know, you should have done that scene, yours are better.
What the heck?
And those are not my panties.
Hi, Reg. Reggie is an ice cream man, likes kids, likes to play music, just a good guy, good, loyal friend. And I think you get all of that, and especially by the time the end of the picture comes when Reg takes over for Jody with Mike. I know I can't ever take Jody's place, but I'm sure as hell gonna try. And I think that you see that Reg really, just all he really wanted to do, man, was have his little ice cream parlor and play in it.
Sharing their life and our loving together.
We went to an ice cream parlor in Alhambra, California, and they built a little stage for me.
Whoa.
And I actually recorded about 3 of my songs straight through. They filmed them. So when it came to Bill and I sitting on the porch playing something, I was very gracious, of course, because I had my music in the picture, right? And Bill was a musician, singer-songwriter. I said, well, Bill, what do you have?
Hi, Red. Yeah, I'm working on it.
He was playing in a band at the time, and we just started, playing. It goes, had that kind of a groove. I'm just sitting here at midnight.
I'm just sitting here at midnight. And I've been sitting here till noon.
Baby's gone and left me, now I'm on the, whatever, and I said, well, that's really good, but we need about 30 seconds. And so I said, well, I'll tell you what, let's jump into, after you sing that part, let's jump into an instrumental. So I made up this instrument. It's da 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 da, da 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 da.
That is totally live right there. You can totally see now that, oh, those guys are actually playing.
At midnight.
He was a good musician, and he still is.
Thank you.
It's a really neat scene. It's really a beautiful way to take a rest from the tension.
I'm going, well, this is cool. We got Bill's music in here, my music is in there, and of course, you know that my music ended up on the cutting room floor.
Are we hot or what? Well, that's enough of that shit.
Well, the relationships of the actors in Phantasm is a special part of the series, for us anyway. We hope that it comes across on the screen that way. I think that it does.
The relationship and the friendship was much deeper than just working together on a picture.
You know, I just really looked up to him, and we just became kind of like brothers, real brothers.
We really liked each other, you know? He was just a kid. And I wasn't much older, really, 10 years older. It was like 23 and 13.
What was it like being a kid on the set? It depends who you ask.
Oh, he was very irritating.
Now, you're asking me, so I will say it was great.
If you were a kid at about 11, 12 years old, when you saw the original picture, Phantasm, you see things through Mike's eyes. And he's so cool, man. He's got, like, knives. He's got shotgun shells that he blows the hell out of doors with. He's got a chrome 45. Wow, how cool is that?
There was a motorcycle on the set, so I got to, like, when I wasn't working, I got to hop on the motorcycle and ride away. And making a movie, it's a blast. It's way more fun when you're 13 than it is when you're older. If you ask somebody else, they might say something like, oh my God, what a terror.
He was quite a nuisance. And he did everything he could to drive me crazy, that's for sure. He turns and he sees me in the bushes and I'm holding my knife. And while he's filming me looking at Mike, Mike's like making all these god-awful faces and mouthing off very nasty words.
I might have done that.
And I'm trying to keep my face, you know, stern. I think the worst thing that Mike did was during the scene where Reggie is coming out of the funeral home, and we've got this huge, huge fan, a wind machine blowing. And believe me, I want to get this scene the first time because I am cold and I am dirty and I am pissed off because sweet Michael is throwing stones and debris in front of this huge wind machine.
I know I got hit more than a few times.
That's because that's the only story they can remember. They're so old. They can't remember any other interesting story, so they always go back to, he put rocks in the wind machine. Oh! There's a whole group of fans of Phantasm that are just Plymouth fans that just love that car.
Loved the car.
Cuda is a cool-ass car, man.
You know, I don't remember exactly how Don came up with the idea of the Barracuda itself.
When I went to high school, there was a kid in the school who had a brand new Plymouth Barracuda, and it was this beautiful car, and we were all very jealous that this kid had one. When I was thinking about what kind of car that the brothers would drive, that naturally jumped into my mind. The car that we used in the first Phantasm was a 1971 Plymouth Cuda.
We ended up finding a car that we ended up having to have built into what's the car in the movie.
I had my brother, who was a custom car painter, actually striped the car. He put gold leaf down the side, so I was able to actually feel like it was personalized for me.
It wasn't actually the Hemi Cuda, which was a different model, but we manufactured it to look like one.
In the first picture, of course, the car between Mike and Jody was a thing that they could have together, work on together. It was part of their relationship. It signified that.
I learned how to drive in that car. I learned how to drive in that Cuda. And I think, I'm pretty sure Bill taught me how to drive. So not an easy car to drive for a 13-year-old if you've never driven a car because the clutch is very tight and the little H pattern is really also very tight.
All right, speed up.
Oh, Jesus.
It was just a lot of fun. It was a muscle car.
Ultimately, that car disappeared after shooting. I don't know if it was sold or junked or whatever, but it's gone, never to be found again. The effect of the ghouls popping out from the graveyard, it was, you know, sort of a temporal displacement to a different time and place. Surrealism was always a component of Phantasm, and I was heavily influenced by Un Chien Andaluz, which was the Andalusian Dog by Salvador Dali and Luis Buñuel.
Michael, grandmother wants to play a little game.
Wow, how'd you do that?
It's the simplest effect from silent film days, where we had, you know, the box with the hand, and we would just you know, put the box on the table, turn the camera on, and then I would just jump in and pull the box out, and they would just not move, and then we would just, of course, in the editing room, just, you know, do a dissolve from the box being there to the box not being there.
That always looked pretty good to me too, so that's why I'm kind of amazed that it looks that good, considering how simple of an effect it is.
I think we can probably do an example of how we did that effect. I'm just going to stop talking for a moment. Now you can kind of see that all of a sudden this box has appeared right here as if by magic. And then if all of a sudden I stop talking again, now you can see that all of a sudden the box has disappeared.
And the phone's ringing.
Excuse me. Yeah.
Grandmother, Michael has returned and wishes to speak
Jody
with you.
again. I found out that he's leaving.
Mary Ellen Shaw plays the character of
The fortune teller from Phantasm.
who knows a lot more, obviously, than she's quite letting on.
Grandmother has told you before not to worry. If he does leave, he'll take you with him.
God, I hope she's right.
She always is.
That the boy's parents are dead, that the brother is restless and possibly going to send him off to somewhere. This is a powerful part of the movie and what made young people seeing the film attracted to it. It's the rub of the movie. It's what people can relate to.
Nobody wants to be alone, you know? Isn't it really about relationships that you have? And what I think was established here was that there was a real love between Jody and Michael. And it could not be separated.
In making Phantasm, we had the storyboard for the movie, and we could see the challenges ahead with all the different special effects we needed to achieve with the Silver Sphere.
We turned to a man named Will Green. He was a nice gentleman who had a background in effects, but really he was, at the time I remember at his shop, he was building these gigantic turntables for car commercials.
He was the man they went to if you needed to revolve a T-bird.
I don't know what he must have thought when we came into him, because I went there with Paul Pepperman, the co-producer, and we explained to him that we had this film and we needed this otherworldly device to fly in and affix itself onto some poor sap's forehead, drill it, and have blood pumping out. He said, well, you know, draw out how you want these blades to look, you know, so I just sketched out that little blade design, which became kind of the trademark by the way he designed it.
We gave him the plans, and he came up really with his own plans.
He actually suggested that rather than make one sphere that could do everything, we might want to break it into different spheres which would do different things.
It ended up being many, many different silver spheres and pieces of silver spheres to create the overall effect for the movie.
So consequently, we had a profile sphere, which had the blades.
The prongs would actually mechanically shoot out. We could make the drill bit actually, move by a long, flexible drill bit that he had attached to it to a drill.
So that we could shoot from the side as it drills into the head. And then we had a blood pumping sphere, which was actually just a half sphere with a hole in the center that the blood would pump out, and then it had a tube that would run down the actor's arm, and he could hide the tube with his hands.
So we were just totally blown away at the job he'd done, and he gave us the bill, and this was back in the 70s, but the whole bill for everything was like $900. The whole scene takes place with the blood spurting out of his head. He then falls down, and then we had another hypodermic that shot would look to be like urine out of him from his death throes. And when it was showed to the Motion Picture Association, to the rating board, they came back and said that they were going to give it the movie an X because of that scene. It was just too graphic. And we tried making a case to them behind the scenes before we got to any kind of a hearing that clearly it was a joke. I mean, it wouldn't really be that graphic in real life, and everyone would understand it. And they said, no, we don't buy that. So we went into the editing room and we took some scissors and we scraped the film frames, and we didn't cut a thing. We sent it back to them, making it look like we made some changes, but they weren't to be fooled. They came back and said, no, it's still an X. And then at the last minute, this really nice guy at African Embassy who was distributing Phantasm, he was buddies with somebody on the board, and he called up, and they ended up just giving us the R rating. We never had to change one frame.
The filming of the spheres was actually pretty funny because for the first few days, we didn't realize that they were mirrors. We kept trying to light them, and you'd actually take the lights and you'd aim them at the sphere, and you could pump the light up as bright as it would go, and the sphere would never get any brighter. It wasn't until about day 3 when somebody on the set realized and actually yelled it out, you don't light the sphere, you light what's reflected in the sphere. And once we realized that, it was a whole new ball game. One of the jokes that I have told for many years is that I'm in every shot that the sphere is in. If you look close enough, I'm in that reflection there. But we actually got some pretty inventive ideas as filming went on, and you'll notice that in some of the spheres, actually, we will take a piece of wall and hide the camera behind it, and then you'll just see a little hole in the wall, and that's the lens is peeking through, but then, there's like a wall of the set that we've brought over and hidden the camera with.
In getting the Silver Sphere to actually fly down the hallway, that was another challenge, and we had someone on the crew who was a high school baseball pitcher, so we had a plastic ball that we'd fabricated and mirrored the inside of it, filled it with sand, and then he would stand behind the camera. We would run the camera in reverse, and he would just throw it right over the camera towards the opposite end of the hallway, and then, of course, playing it back, it looks like the sphere is coming right towards the camera. It worked out great, and of course we cut the part where it then hits the other end and spatters into 50 pieces.
The sound effects, man, that makes so much difference.
The sound editor, the effects editor on Phantasm 1 knew me and asked me to come in and talk to Don about getting some special sound effects and everything. The flying sphere sound was achieved primarily with just using my voice. I mean, all the sounds that I did for Phantasm, not excluding the music, but all the sound effects, the organic sound effects of the dwarves and any of the odd things that would happen, were started just by using the sound, like or things like that. Now I'd do this, then I would process it through a thing called a Marshall time modulator and a vocoder.
It took a long time to shoot that movie, and so probably close to 2 years.
Really, I mean, people might think that it was a drag having to be doing the same picture for 2 years, but I thought it was great. It was like I had a job for 2 years in the picture industry, which is unusual.
I talked to the crew occasionally, and wondered if we'd ever get finished.
We tried to do it like a regular film, but it just didn't work. We shot for about 9 days and then crashed and burned and stopped because we were so out of control and logistically challenged that it just didn't serve any purpose to go forward. So then what we subsequently did is we started filming on weekends exclusively.
We'd essentially get 3 full days of filming with that equipment for just 1 day as a rental, which to us is very important. We just didn't have the money, and we needed to make it last.
Then it would give us the midweek to kind of edit the film and to also do our location scouting and get prepared for the next weekend. So it was a year-long period of shooting, but we maybe shot about 50, 60 days during that period. So there was a lot of cognitive process between shooting days while I was trying to figure out how this strange movie was, going to come together and then ultimately end.
Where I know there was a lot of material filmed that was not used.
The screenplay that we were working from when we made Phantasm was probably 3 hours worth of material. And so we shot it all, and there was a lot of development with the brothers and their relationship and the brother's girlfriend. So consequently, we had a lot of material that wasn't necessarily germane to the story, that wasn't horrific, but it's interesting backstory on the brothers. And I've chosen not to include a lot of that footage because while some of the stuff is interesting as a curiosity item, some of it's not so good. And, these were, I was learning you know, and experimenting with things, and some of the stuff was successful and some of it wasn't.
No! Ah!
Phantasm always had a series of endings built into it, and it was a question of which one was going to be the ultimate ending.
The famous hanging scene from Phantasm 1, of course, languished for what, 2 decades?
Well, my original ending is in Phantasm 4. It's called the hanging tree sequence.
Well, poor Angus, you know, he'd be hanging up on a tree, you know, from a cable, and he looked down at us, and I had gone out and rented what they call spacesuits for all the crew because it was so freezing cold. And poor Angus was just, you know, we'd go off to get coffee and remember that, oh, Angus is hanging from a tree back there.
And ultimately the boy is haunted by these sounds on the wind of the tall man calling to him, "Cut me down, boy, cut me down," which has some cool aspects to it, but it just never felt quite dynamic enough to end Phantasm with.
And then also, too, with the fire extinguisher.
Spraying him with the cold mist from the fire extinguisher, and he completely dissolves. That was cut from the film for the same reason the hanging scene was cut. It was just yet another killing off of the tall man, and it was just, those were too many.
We actually shot one additional ending, which a piece of it is in both Phantasms 1 and 4, which shows Mike at the graveyard at his brother's grave, and then the camera pulls back, and if you keep going back with the camera, it goes back and he passes a funeral in progress, and there's Angus delivering the sermon at this funeral as Mike wanders by. Well, that was kind of, while an interesting concept, it didn't quite work, because I ambitiously tried to do it all in one shot with this Steadicam type system, and it had some technical flaws. There was even some talk at one time of having Mike wake up at the end of the dream, and he would be at Jodie's wedding, and he was going to be marrying the lady in lavender with the tall man presiding. So this was all over a fear of him losing his brother to marriage, which seemed appropriate.
You didn't shoot that?
No. And then there was a thought that that would then end, that he would leave the wedding and then go hop on the back of Reggie's ice cream truck, and then a dwarf hand would grab him out of the, and we had all kinds of ideas, and some of them were intriguing, but none of them ultimately worked. And then finally hit upon this idea of him, you know, awakening and Reggie's lulling him, you know, explaining about the brother being dead, and then, of course, having the tall man victorious in the end. Boy. And that was probably one of the last scenes we shot. Once again, lucky for us, the effects all came together. We had that really dynamic bit with the hands punching through the mirror and grabbed him violently, you know, whisking him off into the netherworlds, and that was the ending for Phantasm.
So the Phantasm theme goes, you know,
no question that for a film director, the moment of truth for your movie is when you sit down with the composer and he's going to play you the theme for the first time, because you've already paid him, and time is short and it's got to be done. And if he plays out a great theme on the piano for you, you got it made, and if he doesn't, you're in trouble. So that was one of those signature moments in my career where Fred played that theme on the piano, and I just burst into applause and was jumping up and down.
Fred Myrow is a very interesting guy, and no longer with us, but in his day a very accomplished musician, and I think Don was lucky to get him.
Phantasm came out, and it was a tremendous success, both in the United States and worldwide. The poster design, oh, that was a really good poster. In fact, I have that poster back here, and it had that wonderful tagline, "If this one doesn't scare you, you're already dead." The tagline was brilliant, and it really succeeded in the marketing of the film.
If this one doesn't scare you, you're already dead. Phantasm.
We went to Times Square on opening night to see Phantasm open in a large theater there, sold out audience, and we're sitting there, and there's one scene in the mausoleum, I think, when the hand comes down on Jodie's shoulder, and there was this gentleman about 2 rows in front of us who jumped in the air. He had popcorn and a bottle of Coke, and it just went flying everywhere.
The audience literally shot out of their seats. And it was like, wow, as a filmmaker, that kind of power, I had never seen anything like that.
And I think we were just doing high fives. We were so excited on just how it all was worthwhile to see these people so frightened.
What the hell is going on? What the hell is going on?
Why I enjoyed horror films as a youth so much is that unlike other genres, frequently after the movie, you're left with open questions, and some of the most satisfying moments in movies is pondering these movies after you've seen them. And I was happy to try that with Phantasm.
Yeah, after Phantasm, of course, we made The Beastmaster, and The Beastmaster was not the fun experience that Don and I had making, Phantasm. And actually, The Beastmaster is responsible for me pretty much just deciding I was going to change directions. If I would have known that Don was going to be able to go back and do all the sequels, it may have been different.
Phantasm, the delusion of a disordered mind, a phantom, a spirit, a ghost.
I mean, I think that the first picture kind of screamed sequel.
For 10 years, the secret of Perigord Cemetery has remained a mystery.
Years afterward, I was pursued by the sinister forces that wanted me to make a sequel, and I tried to stay away from that. But ultimately, I couldn't hold them off any longer.
It's a lot different being a sequel. We tried to keep it the same for the fans, encourage them and to participate the same way. The great thing about it, though, is we brought the silver balls back into the picture, and really we're able to do some wonderful things with those.
This summer, the ball is back. Phantasm 2.
When you work with a motion picture studio, it's a lot like dealing with the devil. They give you one of those choices where you can make a Phantasm sequel, and casting was a big but there. And they really felt that Reggie and Mike needed to be played by working actors.
I had to audition for Phantasm 2. That was not a particularly pleasant process.
Neither of the Phantasm actors had really been working. And I could have probably pushed one through or the other, but they were really focusing on a replacement for Mike.
Don had warned me in advance that he really didn't think that I had a chance to get the part, but I had to audition and I didn't get the job. It's just an old Hollywood story. I don't know if there's, if there's too much crying over spilt milk to be done. I'm not the first person to lose a job that they thought ought to be theirs.
Ultimately, they just made a decision that we had to go with somebody else, and it was really heartbreaking for me because I'm, still to this day, great friends with Michael Baldwin.
When we made Phantasm 2, I was not aware that of the extensive interviewing Don had done for the role of Michael.
I'm not the only one, there's others.
Yes, it is true that I did interview Brad Pitt for the role, and I selected James LeGros over him.
What has he done to you?
James LeGros is a hell of an actor, and he did a fantastic job in the role.
Hey, fuck the doctors, and fuck you too if you don't want to help me. God damn it, Mike, I've tried to help you.
They had also made noises about recasting Reggie.
What the hell am I supposed to do?
God knows what we would have wound up with there.
Come on, let's go.
Casting being the oft-times arbitrary thing that it is, Brad Pitt lost out. Every time I lose a role lately, I think, well, Brad Pitt didn't make Phantasm, and I did, so...
Hey, you had a dream. Just a nightmare.
So surreal.
And I also came to a very simple conclusion, which seemed so obvious, yet at the time was a great breakthrough for me, which was to create a sequel which started the second after the original ended.
I think that was a stroke of genius by Don.
After the 9-year gap, I went back to the tall man almost like with the ease of putting on the same wardrobe and the same shoes. I had in fact kept the shoes. I had kept the wardrobe. Since it was a bigger budget, we actually had 2 more tall man suits designed and fit so that we had the leisure of not wearing the same suit day in and day out.
You think that when you die, you go to heaven. You come to us.
And somehow the tall man just re-imbues me. I think he's really has become a presence in his own right now who does move in on me and take over quite freely.
Mark?
And action.
This can't be happening. It's a dream. It's only a dream.
It's a dream.
Well then, so what am I? The Tooth Fairy?
Phantasm 2 had the largest budget. We had a budget approaching just under $3 million, which by conventional standards is a low-budget film, all right? But for us, it was a huge amount of money. And we had a massive warehouse we rented, and we got great special effects and a lot of stunts and car stunts and action.
Yeah, Don likes to blow shit up. He loves blowing stuff up. The bigger the explosion, the better. And then the house, when it blew up, that was a big blow up. And they actually built that was a 1-story house. They built another story on top. They bought the house. It was in the middle of what they wanted to use for freeway, eminent domain or whatever. They bought the house for like $1 or something, then blew the hell out of it.
I really seized early on about it being a road picture, which I thought would be fun. I thought it'd be really cool to team up Mike and Reggie as fearless vampire killers on the trail of the tall man. It was a different, direction, more action-oriented. I think it let Reggie turn from an ice cream vendor to the Reg Man.
Let's go kick some ass.
The dwarf killer.
And that's really Reg's first step towards this journey of becoming like a warrior.
Come east if you dare.
Get the fuck back!
Rather than just an ice cream man.
You're a bald, middle-aged ex-ice cream vendor. Thanks, Mike.
He's still got those characteristics. He'd still, lay his body on the fires of hell for a friend. And I think that's what's charming about him.
Come on, you mother!
My chainsaw is like, it's like that, it works good. And he pulls out his chainsaw and that blade just keeps coming. That chainsaw fight was choreographed over a period of about a week. We went over every move and every little thing that was gonna happen. And I did all my own stunt work in that except for one stunt, and that was when he's driven me up the wall, I'm on the bench, and he's holding that giant blade up, and I've got to jump over it, and it's got to go right, right in the old crotchola area, and they wouldn't let me do it.
Yes, the tall man does rematerialize occasionally in feminine form, it seems. At least whenever Reggie runs into a pretty girl and thinks he's made a hit, she turns out to be, if not the tall man, then certainly one of his minions.
I've done the film and I still don't understand it. So I'm hoping that when I see it, I'll get a better idea because it's really weird.
Mike, this is alchemy.
Kimmy for short.
And that's the disquieting thing about Reg getting involved in any kind of a sexual encounter in a Phantasm film.
Shit, Mike. Have you looked at her?
Or his lack of it.
It gets hard on the road. Reg, you're thinking with your wrong head.
This is all priceless stuff, and it's the kind of stuff the kind of angst that Reg goes through trying to find a babe. And it's alchemy, Sam Phillips. And she's hot. He did get some action. Yeah, it was working out pretty good for Reg at that point.
God, Reg, I love your head.
That bedroom scene with Kimmy, Sam Phillips, it was a funny scene. She was really grabbing me, and she was really like, I'm getting like, she's slapping my head. Basically, she kept giggling. And she'd start laughing, she'd fall off me, you know, in hysterics on the bed. And I think, really, that we worked on that pretty close to 5 hours. But that was Kimmy.
You know, I've been thinking about us.
Of course, then by the end of the picture, it's you know, it's all back to square one. Then, of course, in the second picture, you know, Mike's been in an institution, so who does the car fall to? Well, Jodi's out of the picture at that point, so I must have the CUDA. And you know, it didn't bother me at all. I really enjoyed driving that car.
I have it downstairs. I think this is it. Is this it? It's a great car, yeah. A real muscle car.
And then, of course, it's my car for the rest of the series, pretty much.
There are a lot of fun stuff that was possible to explore, and at the same time, it was a way to revisit the original.
Graveside service is about to begin.
And expand on some of those themes and effects, and certainly to make a couple of really killer ball scenes that we just didn't have the money or the technology to do in the original. For starters, we decided we'd take it up from 1 to 3 spheres. Then the idea was to create a new breed of spheres, which would be the gold sphere, which was also known on the set as the Rambo sphere, which would be a little more deadly. You know, what else can you put inside one of those spheres? And a laser was an interesting idea to me, and so started to explore it. And then I thought, well, the laser's got to get somebody, so how's that going to happen? And I couldn't really figure out. It was a process of deduction. Right? There's no way we could do some kind of visual effect where it's seared across somebody's face and make that work. So I thought, oh, there'll be a rat. We'll blow him up.
So in Phantasm 2, there was, my whole job was just to build these 2 spheres that they were going to be using for motion control. So they had to have like some servo motors in them, and they had to hook up to the motion control, and like a blade had to come out of one, and then a saw had to come out of the other one. And when I was doing that, I used some wheels from some Lego, from some toys. And the DP, who's a friend of mine, who's a commercial director now, he was like mortified that I would go and use these little plastic parts in these, you know, high-tech motion control spheres. And you know, he gave me some shit about it, you know, at the time. But I guess that caught Don's eye, because after we were done with that, they had to go back and do some reshoots. And so Don called me up, and he was like, "Hey, would you be interested in coming and, you know, get some prop? I think it had to crawl through somebody's shirt or something like that."
I think the response from Sam Raimi to his minor inclusion of Phantasm really was disappointment, because you know, Sam is a frustrated actor, and he really wanted a role in the movie, and I think he probably wanted to get drilled, and there just wasn't a spot for him, so that was the best I could do. I was friends with Sam, and he turned me on to some great guys. His production designer from Evil Dead 2 came on board, ⴚ He did a great job designing that entire mausoleum, and he had suggested Mark Sjostrom, who was the lead effects guy, in charge, but his apprentices were Greg Nicotero and Bob Kurtzman, and who became the K and the N of K&B ultimately.
And Howard Berger, who worked for Mark Sjostrom, who actually body casted me for Phantasm and did that. He's the one that gave my name, that's right, because he just said, "I just worked with a little guy." And Don Coscarelli says, "Really? Get him." Don had this whole thing, like, a history to these, that they are the souls of certain people, and they were, crushed down. Yeah, he must have explained this whole philosophy, and it was so funny because I walked away going, this is a character. You have to do a full body cast. This is a full body prosthetic, head, hands, feet, whole body at one time. It was almost put on like a suit, but then it needed to be perfected. So they would glue on pieces, like I could put the head on, but then the eyes and stuff were floppy. So I had to glue it down to the mouth to get it seamless. Glue it around the eyelids, seamless. And then now you get to go to work. Well, a hot suit, foam doesn't breathe. I'm covered head to toe.
No. All right, yeah, Ed. Woo! You have just been slimed.
Hot summer day, one of those, it happens to be one of those record hot days, and we're sitting there in this extremely hot, the rocks, the terrain, to walk in a suit where you can barely move, because although it's foam, it's rubbery, so no matter how you move, it snaps back. So it's like walking through thick jello. So I developed a way to just kind of meditate and just disappear into a costume. Unfortunately, that didn't pay off one time when I came out of the barrel. Well, 1 or 2 takes, I'm full of slime, but it's fine. I go to sleep, and they're ready for me in a couple of hours. They go, okay, we're ready for you. And I go to stand up, and the entire backside of my costume stays in the chair. It dried up and stuck. So if you do watch the actual film, Phantasm 2, when I'm coming out of the barrel, you'll notice the camera's in such a way to where you're filming up at me. And I can't turn over. If I was to turn over, I was naked. You'd see it would have been a different rating. Whenever I do a character like this, people say, oh my God, you played that character? I'm like, no, it's a team. There's me, the builder of the costume, and if there's a puppeteer, if it's electronic, and the voices. When you add a voice to any costume, any creature like that, to me adds the final dimension.
I processed all the voices and did actually recorded the voices of the dwarves, the little dwarf creatures. So I am their animated voice character. And I ended up doing it from 1 on straight on up through 4. The actual sound of the dwarves, is going through the mic more like that. That's what I would do into the mic, but through a Marshall time modulator and a vocoder, and out comes the dwarves.
The dwarf voices, just perfect, just awesome.
The music on Phantasm 2 was exponentially bigger because we were able to team up with Fred Myrow, the composer, with a fellow named Chris Stone.
One day I get this call, and Fred Myrow knew of me, says, hey, can you help me on Phantasm 2? And then when Don came over, he was quite surprised to see me because he didn't see it. Oh, didn't you do the sound effects? Yeah, I did. And he didn't even know that.
Chris was a master of sampled music, using computer to create the music, and so consequently he was able to give it a much bigger and richer and more orchestral sound.
Because it was a bigger movie, we were going for a bigger scope in the scoring, and that's really why I was hired originally, because I started to get a reputation for being somebody that could do John Williams style music without the price tag.
The problem with working with a major studio is they tend to second guess themselves, and they insist on public recruited research screenings. So we went through a research screening, and the concept of taking a movie as strange as a Phantasm film and asking an audience to rate the different aspects and then going back and cutting the film based on it is pretty ridiculous on the surface of it. But basically the powers that be over there decided after the first screening that we were not allowed to show any dreams, that the dream sequences don't work, and that the audience would need to know where the characters were, who the tall man was, and needed to know the motives of everyone at all times, which you can see goes against the Phantasm mantra, which is that basically everything's a mystery and you're not sure what's real and what's imagined.
It's only a dream.
It's a dream.
I like to think that the finished film is definitely rooted in the Phantasm world, but there's no question it's not anywhere near as dreamlike as any of the others.
No, it's not.
It was originally intended that when the tall man appears in the hearse at the very end, that he would have actually physically transformed from the girl, Kenny. We did a series of makeup tests, but none of them ever worked out, where the tall man would have had pieces of her head kind of coming off of his face as he appeared. And I think if you look at the tall man in that scene critically, you'll see that there is some remnants of that makeup on his face.
For most of his life, a young man has been pursued by a sinister force. Now he must learn the secret of the ultimate evil.
When Phantasm 3, or the opportunity to make Phantasm 3 came along, James had gone on to other things. You know, he'd starred in Drugstore Cowboy and developed quite a name for himself in the independent field, and I'm not sure it was realistic to bring him back to our film, or if he would have had interest. But it gave me the opportunity to sort of right the wrong and bring Michael back into the fold.
Ready and action.
Come on, brother, we gotta get out of here.
Going back to play that role was in some ways bittersweet. You know, a lot of time had gone by, and it was nice to be working with old friends, and that family atmosphere was very real and warm, and that part of it was really good. You know, bittersweet because now it was really, really clear to me that it was just a job, just another job to have or not have.
You see the light now up ahead, don't you? Hmm? Go to it.
The change in the character is really, at least the way I always looked at it, comes out of being in a coma. Mike in Phantasm 3 is very much a victim, and not really the easiest thing to play, the victim.
Hi. What do you want me? Why?
I've stayed friends with all of the Phantasm actors since the beginning, so we've got a couple of decades of friendship under our belt, so it's like, it's great to work with them.
They decided to bring me back, and I just kind of enjoyed working on the picture in whatever capacity they would have me.
Jody?
Yeah, it's me, little brother. Don't be afraid.
It was really wonderful to put Michael Baldwin and Bill Thornbury together playing these brother characters, because they always had a natural brotherly relationship between the two guys, which I think has always shown in the films.
You know, I was gone, you know, so how do you bring him back, you know? And for them to have kind of a twist in a way where Jody takes on a little bit different demeanor was interesting.
Stay away from the light.
Jody is, you know, there, kind of, but he's certainly not all himself.
I'm sorry, Mike. I knew he might lock onto me.
I dug it, actually. It just kind of went whoosh.
It was our first attempt at doing some digital effects, because we had this, what we called the J sphere, which was the Jody sphere, which was a black sphere.
Come on, wait, Jody!
Being a black ball, I mean, what's wrong with that?
When I appeared in Phantasm 3, I was a nurse, and I think Angus was on the other side of me. It was, I was there the whole day, but the filming was actually very short. I guess that was the last time I saw Mike, was in a hospital bed. He didn't want the camera to linger too long on me. He just wanted it very quick so people would say, was that? Was it? He teased me as well, because I would have liked a little more time.
Oh, Ghost, it's just a kid.
My idea with the Tim character was to revisit having a boy in the series, because we went away from that in Phantasm 2, and I wanted to get somebody younger into the film.
I've been on my own since my parents died.
I think Kevin spurred a whole new generation of kids that love Phantasm. In fact, I know that for sure because I talked to him at the shows, at the conventions.
You know, it was almost like Home Alone on steroids, where a kid was living in a town full of zombies, basically, alone, and having to survive.
Nice kid, and not at all the tyrant that I had been. For the scenes for the time that we worked together, I tried to, you know, treat him the way that Bill had treated me.
Okay.
Gloria Lynn Henry in the third was a striking presence.
They call me Rocky.
What the hell are you doing here, Rocky? Basically, she's the only one he can really trust. I mean, he's been through this a couple of times.
Picture that. The three of us facing down the forces of evil.
Yeah. You got something better to do? Yeah, he is quite persistent with her, trying to get her in the sack. Ever try vanilla?
Didn't I tell you? Dairy products give me gas.
She's an incredibly popular character. She didn't die.
Yeah, I know.
And could maybe come back another day.
Let's stick him in the back of that muscle car.
I'm driving. And when we did Phantasm 3, we used an entirely new car, which instead of a 1971, we used a 1970 convertible with a real Hemi engine. So that's the real cool one.
Yeah, I turned to Don, I said, how much are you paying me for this picture? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, why don't you cut it in half and give me the car as half my payment? He wouldn't do it.
Does Don have that one?
Don still has it.
Happens to be in my garage, one of the great props of Phantasm.
If he's coming in later, I'm just going to put him in a headlock and steal the keys. Yeah, definitely 괶 It's like a wound that will never go away. I carry it with me every day.
That's an interesting story that Don was once again reliving his high school through movies.
That is true. That is true. Ultimately, I did get my Plymouth.
Now he has 2, yes.
I think he has 2 minimum. I bet you he's got 3.
I had worked with Bob Ivy, the stuntman on both Phantasm 3 and Phantasm 4, and he was actually a Phantasm fan before I even met him. And so he came onto those 2 films and did some spectacular, death-defying stunts. There's a hearse stunt sequence where it hits what's called a pipe ramp, and it flew about 200 feet.
He's not really doing stunts now, but when he was doing them, boy, he was crazy.
Our journey is now complete.
You know, at the end of Phantasm 3, it's kind of interesting to me how the tall man seems to possibly have gotten what he wants out of old Mike Pearson. Obviously, Pearson sees in the mirror there that he's got something in his head, and it looks pretty freaking painful. And then Mike comes in, kind of walking in zombie-like with those gold eyes. It's a pretty effective scene, well directed. And it's kind of sad.
It's cold.
If you've been watching the movies, you know, and you've been a fan of the films, and all of a sudden, the poor guy, I mean, he looks pretty bad.
Frank, wait!
But he's definitely got a gold sphere in his head, and that can't be good. Stay away from me.
We actually had to bring a doctor onto the set to install the eyes, and then we had a finite time period. It was maybe like 15 to 18 minutes to shoot before eye damage would ensue.
You know, they're specially fitted for your eyes and whatnot.
But the effect was real nice.
And they're gold. I'm not sure how well that gold plays in the film. I'm not sure if you can really tell that they're gold exactly, but you can definitely see them. They look weird.
Well, I still have the contact lenses. I've held on to them. They're in a closet somewhere, so maybe we'll break them out if Michael will put up with them.
Down.
In subsequent pictures, of course, the fans wanted to see more elaborate silver spheres and more silver spheres, so they were given what they wanted.
And hopefully expand them somewhat, because we've always been pretty limited with 1 or 3 spheres.
Carrie Pryor, of course, was involved, I think, to a degree in the second one, but certainly fully in 3 and 4, and did ingenious things.
And so then on Phantasm 3, he called me again, and I just graduated from college at the time. So I came and I showed Don this tape of my student film, which was these robots, which are similar in many respects to the spheres because they're small and chromy and they chase people around. So I think that, you know, Don saw what I did on 16mm, recognized the similarities, and thought I was probably a good candidate to do the spheres for Phantasm 3.
We tried a very, very high-tech analog sphere design created by Carrie Pryor, and it is a really brilliant one.
This is the evil gold sphere, and the spheres in Phantasm 3 all work kind of largely the same. There was a hole cut in the back, and they'd be mounted like on a piece of glass so that you couldn't see the hole in front. And then there were mechanics inside that would, you know, like a servo and some mechanism that would force the blades out. Actually, this one has little pulleys inside. Maybe I even used a Lego pulley. I did. There's a Lego wheel in this sphere. And these cables, you can see the cables actually, they would wrap around this thing, and this would pull the blades in and out. And when you hit the servo, these things would pop out.
We have a great barrel roll sphere where you got the ball is going down the hallway and it's doing a barrel roll. So the way that we did it is we had a clear lucite sheet that was mounted to the camera using lucite arms. So everything's clear, and you could mount the ball at different angles on the clear lucite, and then there was a motorized thing that could turn it.
The main giveaway is you can see a hole in the mirror where the camera lens is poking through.
That was all done in camera, analog, flying down the hall, and it gives it a level of reality of that barrel roll thing that's pretty damn cool, and something I'm really, really proud of.
This we started using from Phantasm 2 on and I just happened to have it here, is one of the key instruments we used. It's a water phone, and you do put water in it, but it's actually called a water phone because the man who invented this up in north in California, his name happens to be Water. But anyway, you play with one of the ways it's played is with a bow, so you go. That's one way. You know, I'm sure you heard this. Another way to do it is you go like that, or there's a lot of different sounds this thing makes. You play it up high, it even gets really some nice low tones. Yeah. This was just used for atmospheric sounds quite a bit. I'd process this too, so it would come out very long sounding. So you know, you'd hear like this long, weird tone going through.
I'm afraid of these things. Think of it as a doorway.
There was an elaborate sequence where we go to the Red Planet. Actually, Reggie goes to the Red Planet, goes into a bunker on the Red Planet, goes down underground, and comes across a scene which later was used in Phantasm 4, which is of a multitude of the dimensional fork space gates, telling us that the tall man's planet would be a way station only and not actually where he lived, which I thought was an interesting concept. The only sequence we shot was a scene in the bunker. We had a really neat rig built with like a dilating door that opened, and Reggie plunges into it, and then it closes, and then he exits through this, into this underground corridor. We shot that, but we never had the funds to go to the planet and do those scenes. And we never figured out how we were going to build an alien bunker on the surface for a price. It's always nerve-wracking when you're making a Phantasm film because you come towards the ending and you have this choice whether to definitively end it or not. And the screenplay was quite definitive in the ending. Reg and Tim, they had captured the gold sphere, the tall man, and the sphere was immersed in liquid nitrogen, so it's frozen and harmless in that state. So the script called for them to travel to Alaska, up into the ice of the northern wilderness.
And we would, dig a hole in the ice, throw the sphere in a case in the ice.
And watch as it freezes over, and they put a little grave marker on there, tall man, R.I.P., and drive off. There was one bit to this sequence, which we actually did film.
We really were in this Arctic gear. And, with the parkas and the fur and the gloves. And they had put like stuff on us to on our eyelashes to make it look like they were like icicles and stuff like that. And we were actually in the valley and it was about 90 degrees outside and we were sweating like crazy.
And then Reggie just has a little quip to end the film, which is, well, now all we have to worry about is global warming. And then they walk off.
That certainly would have put the tall man out of business for a long time. I suggested, however, not wanting to be eliminated from the series, that they leave the tie pin on the tall man when they buried him, and that at the start of the subsequent film, we would revisit the North Pole where the tall man is frozen in ice, and the tie pin would suddenly start to blink, much like the warning light on a car's alarm system. And as it blinked, it would grow hotter and hotter, and the whole ice would melt, and out would come stride the tall man, ready for business again. But that wasn't used either.
I did listen to the Phantasm fans. A lot of them came back to me with the response to Phantasm 3 saying it was too funny, there were these new characters. And I had always seen it as just one more chapter in the Phantasm saga. It's interesting because whenever the new film comes out, they're thinking that's the last film and they don't want it to end like that. So I think now that it's part of a series, people accept it completely. A good friend of mine, Roger Avary, won an Oscar as a co-writer of the film Pulp Fiction. And Roger is really just a wonderful and brilliant writer. And the way they have these television commercials in the States where when someone wins the big sporting game or they win the Olympic medal, and as they run away off the field, an announcer will call out, "Hey you, where are you going? You just won the Super Bowl. Where are you going?" "I'm going to Disneyland." Okay, well, Roger should have said, "I'm going to Disneyland," but instead, after he won the Oscar, what he said instead was, "Hey, I'm going to go write the epic, end-all, kick-ass Phantasm sequel script." So he came to me with this idea that, because he had heard me back when I was writing Phantasm, I had ideas for Phantasm 2, some of the directions I went, and he had always been stewing around in his mind an idea. So he wrote this really interesting screenplay. It's quite epic, large in scope and very violent. It's a very interesting story that just would have made a hell of a film. And I was going to direct it, he was going to write, we were going to co-produce. But ultimately, we were never able to get the funding. During this period, I had also written my own Phantasm 4, envisioned basically as a lower budget affair, of a way to sort of bring the series to more closure than part 3. There's no question that I made a conscious decision to go back to the roots, back to the key characters, and to try to keep it dark and disturbing and as few answers as possible.
Mike left me hanging.
It's like a bizarre Christmas tree ornament accident.
You know, I always figured that you know, when Reg got gang balled there.
Brad, Carrie.
I just figured that they just kind of, you know, bruised him, certainly, and pushed him up into the wall.
Okay, thank you.
36.
Oh, unbelievable.
Holding the roll, we lost power. Oh, that was just on cue is what that was. Marker.
Let's focus.
Your end approaches, but it is not yet.
No, you know, I really didn't consider that Reg would have been put away that easily. So yeah, I didn't worry about it, really.
Action.
Got it.
Don told me that he was ready to make Phantasm 4, and he wanted me to be in the movie. I was not that motivated to act in the film, but I was more motivated if there was something more in it for me, and so I suggested, well, why don't you let me produce the movie?
And it was something that he was interested in learning about and having some experience with.
Don works in a way that's collaborative, and you have to remember also that, you know, by this time Don and I have known each other our whole lives.
It worked out beautifully for me because I was able to bring on a trusted friend to assist me. It was probably the second lowest budget. It was about a $650,000 budget, which is pretty low for the time period that we shot it in. It was the shortest schedule Phantasm ever shot. I think we shot it in about 23 days, which is, for us, was really short.
It's hard to shoot because there's less money. It's hard to shoot because you got a lot of things happening at night in the desert.
Okay, get him, quick! Cut, get him! Get him, come on!
To save money, it was designed to film exterior much more extensively daytime than we ever had in any of the Phantasm movies.
I had forgotten that we had shot some of the footage that he was going to use in Phantasm 4.
Well, the making of Phantasm 4, from its conception, was to utilize this missing material.
I thought it was a very cool idea. It made a lot of sense.
They did bring back the hanging scene, which I had always lamented, and I'm delighted it's there for the ages because I think it's a cracking good scene.
Cut me down, boy!
It's cool that it just even exists and that there's Mike as an adult and there he is, bang, right there. It's like, you can totally tell, oh, that's the same person, man. That looks really neat.
Boy!
The evolution of Mike Pearson in Phantasm 4 is decidedly different, thank God. You know, I had been pretty concerned that Mike not be such a victim and that he take a much more active role in his own destiny.
Come, boy. We have things to do.
There are numerous indications that I don't know if he's turning into the tall man, but he is definitely not the little boy, you know, chasing his brother down the street anymore.
Hey, what are you anyway? I thought you were my brother.
It's like the older brother, Jody, you know, kind of takes a turn to the dark side. And his younger brother does too, in a way.
Reggie said you died in that car wreck.
No, that was a lie. It's a severing of a relationship, and that disturbs me.
You know, Reggie, I can count on. But you I can't trust.
Those are tough emotions, you know, and you just do your best to make it believable, but, you know, for me, I would rather, you know, be a happily ever after, you know, situation. So maybe that works to your advantage when you know, shoot a picture like this or a scene like that with that kind of sentiment in it.
Well, through the film, Mike really doesn't trust Jody, and I think for pretty good reason.
What's happening, brother?
You know, when you get into the character, I mean, you have conflicting feelings.
Just had to be sure. Before I killed my own brother.
Mike is possibly, you know, becoming something that we dreadfully don't want him to become.
In terms of the tall man and his genesis in Phantasm Oblivion, one of the ideas that had always been ruminating around is there was some kind of historical perspective to him. And this we had alluded to in Phantasm originally.
You're him, right?
Jebediah Morningside. I was delighted with the Jebediah Morningside character because it finally gave me an alternate role in the Phantasm series.
Can I assist you? Have we met?
It's in the daytime. He's out there drinking lemonade, and he's so nice and friendly. It's great. It's a great juxtaposition of, you know, good and evil. It's beautiful. It's the way it should be.
Did you make passage through the dimensional fork?
Well, the fortune teller woman that seems to be Jebediah Morningside's wife, it's like, you know, Don echoing certain things from Phantasm 1, and well, why is she there, and what part does she play? You know, that's for people to decide for themselves. She's there.
You know, my thoughts on to what that exact meaning or who she is, or I'm going to keep them to myself for now.
Fear is the killer. That's what grandmother wants you to learn.
One more completely unexplainable layer of Phantasm to go like this with.
It was all in your mind.
Don's ability to add to the mystification by having the old fortune teller lady from Phantasm 1 reappear, who in fact is not the same actress, but looks identical in every way.
And the voice of Mrs. Morningside is played by my wife, Jennifer Bross.
Jebediah!
When she says, Jebediah!
My name's Jennifer, by the way.
Actually, the reason why her name is Jennifer in Phantasm 4 is I offered the role to Michael Baldwin's wife, Jennifer, and she declined to participate. Actually, Jennifer Baldwin is in Phantasm 3. She plays one of the nurses at the desk when Reggie comes in.
Thanks for pulling my ass out of the fire.
Heidi Marnhat's a terrific actress, and I had found her through Carrie Pryor.
And he was friendly with Don, as he had done the special effects for the Phantasm films.
Carrie had made a film which was ultimately abandoned, but it starred Heidi, and I got to see it while he was editing it.
And Don saw me in Roadkill and said, "Who's that girl?" Bastard. I'm gonna give him what for?
No, Jane!
Jane, wait a second. Where are you going?
You bastard! What do you want? What do you want with us?
And I just thought her performance was terrific. I thought she was, you know, not only she was beautiful, but she also had a certain spunk about her that was really cool.
I'm right here! Get out of your car and face me like a man!
We had this warehouse that we'd rented to shoot Phantasm 4 in, and brought her out, and I got Reggie over there, and I had them forced her to do an audition for the role, and she was just great. And the two of them really bonded, even though there was a bit of an age difference. You know, I actually could see them, you know, maybe being a couple.
What?
Yeah.
The first place that we went to was Death Valley, and I had to meet the cast and crew there, I think, on their 4th day. And I drove myself at night for 5 hours by myself, driving through the desert, and then arrived in this sort of remote, dingy little town, you know, Death Valley, and stayed in this cool hotel. I mean, it was just the vibe of everything. It was very exciting for me, you know, to be part of it all. Damn the turtle.
Bob, what do you have to say? There you go. He's the man.
Bob Ivy actually did the stunt for that. He actually flipped that car over.
Cut!
You know, my sense is that Heidi was pretty fearless about this kind of stuff.
And actually, that was the first day of shooting in Death Valley.
Give me your hands, give me your hands. Get out of there. And cut it.
It was so exciting. It was really, really thrilling for me.
And when we shot the scene with the car, it was tricky.
I thought cars only look like that in the movies.
Yes, it was really hot.
Yeah, me too. That was a pretty good one. I mean, you could really, really feel the heat.
Since I knew that she was going to end up turning into this evil minion of the tall man, I wanted her to be just really sweet and really innocent and sort of girl next door.
Nightmares aren't real, you know, and neither is your tall man. Give me one of your shirts, will you? Mine's too rank to sleep in.
So that when she does turn into this, you know, evil person, it's such a contrast.
It was really an outgrowth of this storyline that we'd created for the Reggie character, which was the fact that he was unlucky in love.
In your dreams, Reggie.
If you only knew.
The greatest audience satisfaction, some of the best laughs came out of Reggie's sexual frustration and his relationship with this Samantha Phillips character. And so then it just evolved into Phantasm 3, only this time it was with the Rocky character.
Sweet dreams.
And so I was really trying to come up with something that could really top that. I mean, you know, okay, Reggie finally gets in bed with this gal. Oh, she's so beautiful. She's right there for his taking.
So, anyway.
And guess what? She's got spheres for breasts.
You want to get it on, Reggie?
He was not going to be satisfied with this one either.
No.
So it's actually a prosthetic that is over my body, and then there were spheres that were made to fit into what looked like opened and ripped flesh.
And then I puppeted spheres, they were on rods.
And action spheres, they're just moving around a little bit, straining.
So that the initial spheres that burst from her are puppeted from underneath.
1, 2, 3, fly. And cut it.
And Carrie Pryor was on the top of a ladder behind the wall behind me.
And then you cut to an up angle, and then there were a couple spheres on strings.
Pulled on these strings and they ripped out of my flesh.
I think Heidi's very proud of that too.
It was so much fun.
I thought the fight afterwards with the balls was pretty special.
Ready? And sphere. And cut it.
3, 2, 1, go.
Yeah! And action. And cut it. Action. And fly sphere. Of course.
Don, will you give a cue for blood?
And cut it.
I think that Reggie's response to all of these challenges is always amazing.
Wait, we're not done yet. Sorry, baby, but yes, we are.
Geez, I would just sort of abandon any possibility of a love life altogether after all he had endured.
But Reggie is the everyman.
Right, and I think that's the charm of the character, to tell you the truth.
He's a balding 50-something ice cream man that can't quite get laid, but you know, he's gonna go battle the devil. So that's what's not to like about that.
Blow me. Yeah, you know, I can do that because Reg can do it, you know?
And cut it.
Some cops can be real assholes.
He's way more than just comedy relief. You know, if you talk to Phantasm fans, they love Reggie more than anyone. He's the most popular. In a way, he's really the most popular character. You know, next there's the tall man, of course, but people are genuinely afraid of him.
Ice cream man. It's all in his head.
Reggie Bannister has always been a very vocal and supporter of the film, and he's done a lot of publicity on behalf of the series. And he's always looking for options for us. Reggie had come across some digital artists who were Phantasm fans, and they found out that Reggie was working in the same facility, and they said, "Oh, we have something we want to show you." And they showed Reggie this idea of multiple spheres coming down, and they gave him a tape, and he brought it and showed it to me, and I was looking at it thinking, wow, this is really cool, but you know, could we afford it? And Reg went back, and the answer came back is that, you know, we'll do it for whatever you have. So we pretty much got this sequence for like nothing.
I mean, in terms of, you know, I don't know what the dawn of the digital age and its impact on Phantasm. I don't know. I'll tell you this: the next Phantasm, that's the way to do it. You know, it's all going to be CG.
Christopher Stone did this lovely score for us.
Fred had passed away between Phantasm 3 and Phantasm 4, so when Don and I were actually working together and playing his theme against the show, it was really eerie. It was like he was like in the next room or something. We would expect him to come out of the loo any second, you know, and say, "Oh, hi, what are you doing?" You know, that was the feeling you got. It was kind of eerie. We missed him not being there. There was a lot less separation in this one between underscore and sound effects. This one was where the sound design really was much more integrated with the score in this one.
We certainly approached it with a certain kind of reverence where each actor got their send-off sort of with a particular musical motif, and hopefully in a somewhat moving way.
So it's interesting at the end of Phantasm 4, when you get that insert shot and really the ball is kind of coming out of the poor kid's skull, it looks pretty horrific.
The tall man at the end of Phantasm 4, when he goes at last to the space gate, has, I think, an almost ambivalent look on his face. I think there's a look almost of just satisfaction, slightly tinged with regret, that the tall man has achieved to a point what he has been attempting to achieve.
In terms of the tall man winning, he wins, I don't know. I guess people thought that, oh, Mike's dead. But I don't think so.
Yeah, I prefer not to comment about that kind of stuff. I just sort of leave it up to the audience to figure out the connections.
We then go to the final scene in which the boy Mike hops a ride on Reggie's ice cream wagon. And we've come full circle back to the beginning so that we're not quite sure where we've been, where we are now, or where this may take us. And that is the magic, I think, of that closing moment.
I'm dying, Reg.
Yeah, the ending was always going to be like that from the concept.
Hey, did you hear something?
It's just the wind.
The film is very Phantasm-y. It has a totally ununderstandable ending with lots of room for interpretation. That's Phantasm. That's what's good about it. You know, that's where the audience can be much more creative with the ending than we ever could be.
It's just the wind.
I mean, if you're going to call it an ending for Phantasm, in a weird way, it's almost a happy ending, you know? I mean, it's grim, but it's, you know, interesting, because every character wins in a weird way.
It's never over.
You know what? I'm always hoping, you know, that it can continue, because I think the fans would really love that.
Everybody tells me that there's going to be one, or when I say anybody, I'm talking about people that should know if there's going to be one.
Well, I have a number of different notions for other phantasms. And I'm hoping one day to get the time to be able to do it in one fashion or another.
And they're talking about it being rather epic, actually, and they're talking about doing three pictures.
My involvement in that big Hollywood budget to picture would be, I'm sure, in the cameo variety.
Even if I'm not in it, it's okay, because I know that it's going to make a lot of people happy.
There's always been the possibility that someone would buy the Phantasm franchise and continue to make the films, as inevitably will happen, I suppose, someday, without Don Coscarelli's participation. But if so, I have no idea how they can have quite the same quality and character without that utterly unique sensibility that Don possesses.
Nothing yet is cast in stone. So, but I think that's the nature of Phantasm. It's ephemeral. It's something that's elusive and hard to get your fingers around.
If they don't make the big budget movie, I'm sure Phantasm 5 would happen eventually at some point. There's no reason that it wouldn't.
I have entire scripts written by a collaborating writer of mine named Stephen Romano, which are fascinating character studies of the different Phantasm players. And they would be easy to film.
You know, maybe I'll come back as another black ball or something, you know, like that. A big basketball would be interesting.
There will be more phantasms in the future. There will be more phantasms in the future.
All that is unknown will be known to you once more.